Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump says the U.S. will quit the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal on his first day in the White House. Is he to be taken seriously, and is there any hope still left for the deal? London-based Clip1 takes off in big Chinese cities as well. Will this really encouraging a nation of thinkers and readers? And we begin today's program with the U.S.-backed Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal known as TPP. President-elect Donald Trump from the United States has laid out a list of priorities when he enters the White House. That includes withdrawing the country from the deal. Though this has been an anticipative decision from the new administration, ripples are still being felt throughout Pacific and beyond.
An unsurprising announcement.
On trade, I am going to issue our notification of intent to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a potential disaster for our country. Instead, we will negotiate fair bilateral trade deals that bring jobs and industry back onto American shores.
The massive trade deal is a proposed agreement among 12 Pacific Rim countries. It would cut tariffs and deepen economic ties. Though signed by nations covering 40% of the world's economy, the TPP has not yet been ratified by the individual countries.
TPP is meaningless without the United States. It's for the same reason that the renegotiation is impossible.
With Trump's presidency victory, the withdrawal of the U.S. was expected. During the campaign trail, Trump continuously gave arguments against the pact.
Yeah, I think it's an immediate loss of credibility in Asia, but in a way that potentially positions the U.S. to re-engage moving forward.
But the de facto death of the TPP does not spell the end of free trade. At the APEC meeting in Peru last weekend, leaders of 21 Asia-Pacific member economies endorsed free trade and warned the dangers of protectionism.
As we move forward, we're keeping our options open. We're talking about how important trade is in positive ways, and we're continuing to collaborate on the positive issues that we know can make a difference in people's lives.
Other fellow members of the pact say they have not yet given up on it. Furthermore, China also stepped up to propose 2 free trade deals in the region. Though Trump might deal a fatal blow to the TPP, Asia-Pacific is still facing robust trade prospects and intense economic competition.
To discuss more about the possible death of the TPP and future possibilities, we are joined in Beijing by Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics with the University of International Business and Economics. In Washington, D.C., we are having 3 guests, Gary Hufbauer, who is from the Peterson Institute of International Economics, and also Mr. Simon Lester, Trade Policy Analyst from Cato Institute. Finally, but certainly not least, Young-Jung Lim, lecturer in Korea Studies at the School of Advanced International Studies with Johns Hopkins University, originally coming from South Korea. Welcome to the 4 of you. First of all, how should we understand from the 2 American guests, Mr. Hufbauer, about the decision made by Mr. Trump during his first 100 days, getting off, TPP?
Well, my view of this decision is that
Mr. Hufbauer, please.
Yes. Yeah. My view of this decision is that it's a golden opportunity for China to extend its geopolitical and economic footprint in Asia and further in South America and other parts of the world, because the U.S. is clearly withdrawing by this decision, is coming in, and the other big power in trade and economic events is China. So we will see whether China takes advantage of this opportunity.
But Mr. Hufbauer, you probably want to clarify for what do you make of this decision yourself? It's not just China's reaction to your decision, but rather the decision itself. What does it mean to the United States? Briefly, if you can.
Yes, well, for the United States, it means that we're going to give up the possibility of increasing our own economy by about 0.5%, which is actually a pretty big number for the U.S. It also means that we're not going to have access that we had negotiated to markets in Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, which we don't have trade agreements with. So we're going to give up those opportunities.
Giving up opportunities, that is what it means, according to Mr. Hofbauer, about withdrawing from TPP for the U.S. Mr. Lester, you're coming from Cato Institute. Probably you have different views?
I don't have different views. I have additional things. I think there's a lot we don't know about Donald Trump's trade policy at this point. He hasn't put together a trade team yet, so I think to some extent we just have to wait and see what concrete proposals they've come up with. Now, obviously the announcement of withdrawing from the TPP is a big deal, and he's been saying that all along on the campaign trail. At the same time, I think we do have to recognize that this may be just a negotiating tactic. Donald Trump prides himself on being a good trade negotiator. Maybe he thinks this is the best way to get the best deal from our trading partners. So I think we do have to take some time and see what the Trump trade team that eventually is put in place actually has in mind for trade policy.
Mr. Lester, help us to understand as well. Mr. Trump, during his campaign, he's talking about TPP, quote-unquote, as a disaster. But of course, that's campaign rhetoric. Coming into the office, governance, that's a different thing. But at the same time, when he was briefing the reporters about his decision, so-called for our first 100 days, he's talking about having fairer and bilateral trade agreements rather than TPP. What is your understanding? Does that suggesting to us any direction, new direction of U.S. trade deals?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So he's talked about trade in a positive way. We have had bilateral trade deals many times over the past 15 years. So it's possible that they have a concrete, constructive approach to trade policy through bilateral trade deals. I prefer the multilateral approach. I think that's more beneficial in terms of economics, but I do want to wait and see what the concrete proposal is for the bilateral trade deals. What's going to be in them, and with which other countries would we have these deals? Would it be Japan, the UK, New Zealand, China? There's just a lot we don't know, and it's hard to say anything too concrete about the benefits or costs of all of this.
Professor, in Beijing,
but let me say something about.
Okay, go ahead. Very briefly, sir.
I'd like to say something about the bilateral deals that Trump envisages. His view of trade or trade agreements is that if the U.S. Imports more from the partner country, that's not a good deal. If the U.S. exports more to the partner country, that's a good deal for the United States. So what he wants to do in trade agreements is to reduce the size of U.S. trade deficits with countries like Japan or Mexico, or if we had a trade agreement with China. Now, we've never, in recent history, negotiated trade agreements with this notion that the U.S. is going to export a lot more to that country and import not much more from that country. So he's starting from a very different point of view on how trade agreements ought to look, and a very difficult one to achieve an agreement on.
Right. Professor Liu here in Beijing, what is your observation, Professor Liu, in Beijing about that? First of all, the decision, if likely to be taken, we don't know because Mr. Trump seems to change his mind most of the time. Secondly, what would be China's reaction? Some say China is golden opportunity. Do you agree really with those views?
Well, I'm not that optimistic about China because the assumption of saying this is that it is a zero-sum game. Actually, regional integration is the common goal that is there to boost trade and bring out the new vitality for economic recovery. So, while there has been argument about who is there to sit in the driver's seat for the Asian-Pacific integration, it seems that politically there's a window of opportunity for China, but I do not think the U.S. would completely give up the previous investment in the maneuvering this the Asian pivot.
Mr. Lester earlier was talking about this might be a negotiation tactic. Do you think there's a possibility like that?
Yeah, I think that can be, because it is very early to really predict what is going to happen from Mr. Trump. when he is really seated in the office. I think he is really there to overcome a sort of a learning curve. But of course, he is a quick learner, and he will face the reality and change some of the rhetorics or modify some of the rhetorics. So one form could be, yes, there is a general review because they already have a number of bilateral agreements with the individual members of the TPP, or he is there to effect some cosmetic changes so that he can really demonstrate his ego and deliver what he promised during his election campaign.
But would that be a possibility that he is likely to approach the trade issue with a totally different direction, which Mr. Hofbauer also mentioned earlier, which is trying to make sure there will be increasing number of exports rather than any import from certain country? Is that possible under this current global system?
I think that's really a unilateral wish because many of those members, they are really spreading across the fence, and they are shopping for the best favor, what can be given in different type of trade framework.
Right.
So now just because the U.S. is offering more to the privilege of those countries, so therefore they would elect the U.S. as the big brother. But if U.S. is just moving towards its own national interest and without a balancing view towards the national interests of other members. So I do not think they really have this kind of call to really bring these members together anymore.
Ms. Lim, of course, there are so many countries that are original members of the TPP. They all have worked very hard in order to reach a deal through the deal also through their own parliament. Now U.S. withdrawal seems to have changed a lot. What do you think might be the reactions we've already seen from Japan, which is saying if U.S. withdraw, the whole TPP deal become meaningless? Australia is suggesting, well, maybe we could see whether we could push it ahead a little bit further, but haven't found any partner yet in that regard. So what do you make, coming from a South Korean perspective and someone who's doing Asian studies?
Yes, I really enjoyed the other panelists' observation because I do share my own observation with each of them. First and foremost, I also need to emphasize that it might be too early to judge everything because he's still president-elect and we didn't see the concrete policies, even though outspokenly or explicitly he already addressed that his new administration is willing to withdraw from this multilateral approach, but still we don't know the concrete policies. So probably I do hear the voice from the Australia, I do hear the concerns from the Japan as well, but from South Korea's point of view, South Korea, our policy has been more like a wait and see because we have concluded many important FTA, including cross FTA with the United States or even with China or with the European Union or Australia. So our policy has been more like a wait and see, and some criticism actually have been made by the other party because their criticism was more about our government's indecisiveness. But probably the policy actually resulted in a kind of successful outcome. So we'll see. But my last comment should be our major concern is what if the U.S.'s that kind of geostrategic, geopolitical influence in this region is shrinking substantially. Yes, I think I want to share that kind of observation.
I see. Mr. Hofbauer, one of the things that you want to make when you do the comparison is about, what about the other alternatives? If TPP doesn't work, let's just say, what are the other alternatives? Is RCEP likely to be as the same weight as TPP? How would you compare these two concepts? What could be something else that could make up for the loss, quote-unquote loss, for some countries at least?
Let me give you a quick answer, and then unfortunately I have to leave because I have another
all right, sir. Go ahead.
Right at this very moment. The RCEP doesn't have as high standards as the TPP did. It's not as comprehensive in covering intellectual property, state-owned enterprises, and so on and so forth.